Hello guys, welcome back again. So today we again come with one important topic, that is the microservices. So let's try to understand. Microservices are the architectural approach to build our application from small to large scale applications. With this approach, an application is broken down into the smallest component that are independent to each other. Unlike the monolithic architect where all the functionality are targeted to build into a single project and application, whereas microservices help us to separate the functionality to develop in a more modular way, where all the modules work together to accomplish a single specific task or the functionality that we want to proceed. With this diagram, let's try to understand what is the difference or what is the role that monolithic and microservices architect plays into the application. So as we can see into our application, monolithic architect are dependent and compound development project of user interface, business functional component and the database logic. Whereas the microservices on the other hand, that consist of the multiple services that are developed for a single purpose and which are independent to each other. And in the monolithic architect, we can see the database is coupled during the development and we are constrained to use the single database due to the complex logic. Whereas in the microservices, you can see each service consists of the independent or dedicated database due to its modularity form. And as we can see in the monolithic architect, it is constrained to the single programming language, that is the dependency for the backend business logic. Whereas in the microservices, we can use the multiple technologies or language for each microservice and we can use it into our front end. That are the language specific constraint is removed in the microservices now. Whereas in the monolithic approach, you can see the solution when we are deploying into a server, then we have to deploy the whole application again into a single package that will increase our downtime. Whereas in the microservice, if you are upgrading one part of the functionality, you don't need to upgrade all the instances. You will only upgrade or deploy that particular microservice, which will increase, or you can say, the efficiency and decrease the downtime of your website. So moving forward toward the benefit of the microservice architect are, microservice basically gives us the development team and the testing team a faster approach through the distributed development. Provided the ability to develop multiple microservices simultaneously, this means more developers working on the same application but a different functional module at the same time. The result of which is the less delivery time of the application to the client. Below are some critical points that you are able to see into your screen right now. First is the faster development. That is obvious since multiple teams are working on the different module parallelly which are independent to each other. So it will decrease the cause of the error, or you can say any functionality break into your application. Second is the high scalability. As the user demand for some service in the application grows, you can deploy those services across multiple servers and the infrastructure to meet your need. As much as the usage of the service increase by the end user, easily deploy and extend the microservices based upon the need by using the load balancer. Third one is the resilience and the independent. The independent service, after you properly deployed, it will not impact to the other service. Again, that will be a big advantage over the monolithic approach. Next one is the easy development. That is quite obvious because the microservices based upon the application more modular way than the traditional monolithic application. The problem that came with the application deployment and the application downtime are reduced, as we already discussed. Next one is the accessibility for the development. Since the larger app is broken down into the smaller modules, so developer can easily understand, update and enhance the new changes, which result in the faster development cycle if planned with the agile methodology. So more open, the biggest advantage of the microservices, now we are not constrained to the language barrier. So previously in the monolithic, as we already discussed, in the monolithic approach you need to be constrained with the one single language, programming language, due to the business logic. Now it is removed in the microservice. You can use the multiple technologies based upon the need that we have. So with this diagram, let's try to understand the basic architect of the microservice. Let's say you have a client application which are using the multiple microservice for the admission purpose, attendance purpose, and you can say the n number of services, right? So by using the multiple microservice, you can see each microservice has its own database connection and its own independent database. It is easy to develop and deploy, and that will increase our efficiency. Now with this application you will try to understand, like with this diagram you can see you can develop the multiple application. That is the basic of the microservice. Now as we move forward, if you don't want to be expose your services to the end user, so what we will do is we will integrate a API gateway. So what API gateways are? API gateway is nothing but a middleware layer of directing incoming HTTP request call from the client application to a specific microservice without directly exposing your microservice detail to the client and returning the response from the generated respective microservice. To achieve that, what we will use the Ocelot, which is a open source API gateway for the .NET Core platform, which is officially supported by the Microsoft as well. What does it mean is basically, this is the Ocelot gateway that we will use for this block. So what Ocelot provide us, basically Ocelot or basically the any API gateway provide us the API virtualization, which API gateway act as a single point of entry for all the microservices that you build and avoid direct availability of microservices to the client. So that will hide vulnerability also for your microservices. And servers act as an additional layer of security for your microservices as well. So you don't need to be perform the authentication logic at each service level. You can perform it at the API gateway level at once for all, and then you are good to go to use your microservices because you already authenticated everything into your API gateway, right? So it will also decrease the microservices complexity. API gateway helps us in that also. So moving forward, let's switch to the Visual Studio and create our first microservices. First we will create our microservices, multiple microservices, and then we will integrate the Ocelot gateway so that we can see how we can prevent our APIs to directly expose to the end users. So let's switch to the Visual Studio now. I'm using Visual Studio 2022 community version for this tutorial. So click on create new project. Here you have to first choose the blank solution. Here give it a suitable name. I am naming as Microservices and give it a name, unique name, and choose its directory. So I am creating there. Click create. So this is a blank solution. So the first project that we are going to add is, if you quickly recall our diagram, so here this is the client application that is going to be consume our services. If we carefully look at the APIs that we have to build, we are splitting our functionality into the small blocks. So we will create two APIs project. One is for the student admission and one is for the student attendance API. You can create n number of APIs based upon the need, but for this demo I am using these two. So click on this solution name, add new project. Here you have to choose the template ASP.NET Core Web API, okay, because we are going to create a APIs. So click next. Here you have to give it a name, student admission management, okay. Click next and here you are going to be asked a specific framework. Here you can use the 7.0, that is the standard one, that is the latest one. So click this, uncheck this, we don't need it, we are not using Docker anywhere right now. Click on create button. This will create a ASP.NET Core Web API project for us. Okay, so here you have one sample API ready for the weather forecast. Similar way, this is for the admission, and one other web API project we will going to be create is, name it as student attendance management. Okay, so same steps, 7.0, choose it, click create. So here we have two APIs project with us, right? So these APIs working as a microservices because we splitted it into the small parts. One API or project is basically taken care for the student admission, and other is for the student attendance management. So quickly click on this. Let's create one new controller, that is your API controller with read write actions. Name it as student attendance. Okay, and just to save our time, I have my template ready for this, so I am choosing its name from there so that we can save our time. So quickly click on add. It will by default create your methods for you. So here, to just save our timing, let's quickly copy paste the naming or methods from there. So in this API I am only using a single method that will retrieve a list of all the students for me, right? And here he is asking to create one model, so let's create that quickly. So let's add the model, and here we have the model for it, attendance model. So here you go. Oops. Okay, so here we have our model ready. So this API is doing nothing but is simply returning us a list of attendance detail when we are calling it. We are going to be test this in a bit. Let's create a same get list for the student admission also. So firstly, let's create a model of it. So let's add one model so that we can return a list. So here you go, get rid of this name. Okay, perfect. Now we have our model ready. Let's add a controller method which will return a list. So that is going to be API controller with read write action, and the name is going to be student admission controller. So I name it like this. So I have my controller ready with me, so simply updating it here and get rid of this name. Yeah, so here you go. Now our APIs are ready. Since this is doing nothing, simply returning a list, you can create n number of APIs or method based upon the need. Just for this demo, I am creating two get APIs. One belongs to student admission and one belongs to student attendance. So click on the solution, go to the properties, simply choose multiple startup project. Here you have to be select both the project to in start mode. Click OK. Now run your code, you will see multiple projects will be started at once. Okay, now let's test the API. So now we are building this diagram. So basically we have a number of microservices and that we are going to be test it. Okay. Now just wait for the Visual Studio to run the instance of the particular APIs. So here you go. You can see one API is running over there, another API is running over 7181 port, and one is running on 7058 port. We have to be remember these port numbers. So let's quickly save it in one of the text file so that we can't forget. One is this and another one is this. Okay. Okay, here you go. Now simply let's test our methods. So let's test our method names that we used. So it is a get call and probably it should be a API slash student admission. Yeah. So here you go. This is 7058 is for the student admission. So this is the get call, right? That will return us a list of all the student admissions. So this is one, and same way we can test the another attendance part for to the another port that is running on 7181. So quickly paste here. Student attendance this time. Okay, here you go. Here we have a list of array for all the student attendance. Okay, so let's copy this also. Okay, now our both APIs are up and running. Now let's try to understand the concept of API gateway. So API gateway is nothing but a middleware layer of directing your incoming HTTP request call from the client application to a specific microservices without directly exposing your services to the end client. So here we have to be understand the role of the API gateway. You are not exposing your API services to any of the client. You are just expose the API gateway so that your client will use that, and API gateway handle your request which specific microservices I have to be called at what request. Okay. So to achieve that we are using Ocelot here. Ocelot API gateway. So Ocelot is an open source API gateway. As I told you earlier, it is open source and it is a .NET Core platform which is officially supported by the Microsoft also. So what Ocelot do for us? It will simply, based upon the route configuration, it will simply reads the downstream URL and the upstream URL. Now we have to be understand what are downstream and the upstream URLs. Okay, so it is nothing. Let me show you one file. So this is, here you go, Ocelot JSON file. This is the configuration file that Ocelot understands. So here what we are doing is, one thing is the downstream path template and one is upstream path template. So here you need to be understand downstream path template is the API URL, microservices API URL that is going to be actually called when the client call for specific service. And upstream path template is the URL that you expose to the client. So what we are doing is we are simply mapping in this route configuration of Ocelot. What we are doing is we are creating one configuration file in which we mapped our microservices to one endpoint that we are going to be expose it. Like in this way, I have upstream STB method where I have allowed method that I want to be exposed to the client, and the upstream URL API gateway / attendance service. Now let's try to achieve this. So stop this project. Now we have two microservices. One is student admission and another is student attendance. Now what I will do is I am going to create one project underscore, and here I name it as student API gateway. Okay, this project will act as a API gateway. If you look here on the diagram, this project is we are going to be create, which will handle our all the request. Okay, first thing is we have to be open the manage NuGet package manager, and over there we have to be look for Ocelot, and this is the library that we are going to be use for the API gateway. So click on install. It will ask for the dependencies, click OK and I accept. It will install all its dependent library into the project. Okay, after that you have this library into your project and you can check its dependency. From here we have it. The next thing is you have to be create one route file in which we are mention our routes. So let's create one JSON file, name it as ocelot.json. Click add. Now save our timing. Let's add our configuration routes. So let me explain this what it is. So here we have defined one routes array in which we are telling the Ocelot library to handle our request. So in this we have downstream path template, that is your actual microservice API endpoint, and here the schema that you are going to be use, here the host and the port number in which you have hosted the application. In case it is in the production, you have to be mention the domain name over here and the port number. And upstream path template is the URL that you are going to be exposed to the client. As per our definition, this URL that client is going to be consumer request to the API gateway, this is the upstream URL. And here are the method that you are going to be allow it, get, post, put, delete. You can add as per your needs. This is for the attendance and this is for the admission. So we added our routes that we are going to be consumed with this API gateway. Next thing is open the program.cs file. Here we have to be first load this JSON file. So quickly replace this. So the first thing is we have to be load this ocelot.json into our configuration file, builder file, and then we have to be, second thing we have to be tell the services to add the Ocelot service in it. And lastly on step 3 we have to be tell our application you want to be use the Ocelot. That's it. Now this is the old configuration we need it to make this project as a API. So click on the solution now, go to properties, add this to the start. Okay, now run the application. Remember last time we accessed the URLs like this for this admission on port number 7058. Now instead of calling this, what we are going to be use is, this is the third project that is on the port number 7031, and these are the other two, 7058 and 7881. Sorry. So now I go to this route file, the JSON file that we have created. I copy this URL, upstream URL basically. So I copy this that we are going to be share with the clients. So update this, paste. Now you can see here we are getting the data. If I zoom it, wait for it. So here you can see you are able to retrieve the list of all the attendance. Same way for the other URL, I open this route and using this student admission. So here you can see you are again getting a data whatever you have it. Although these two APIs are hosted on a separate endpoint as mentioned in this notepad file, one is on the 7.1. If you try to access this independent, you are able to do so. But if you don't want to be expose these endpoint to the clients, you will create a gateway for it using the Ocelot. Okay, so this is how we can call our microservices using the API gateway, and if you want to be independently call the services, then you are good to go. So now what is the next step? We have to be authenticate or secure our APIs, that we will cover into our next upcoming session, in which we will try to first implement the authentication part, and over there we will pass some authentication token, that is basically known as the JWT token from our service, and that token will be validated into each of your microservices, so that we have a clean architect and secure APIs all the way. Thanks for watching. See you in the next lecture.